Okay, welcome everyone. Uh, the shout outs we always do are it's such an amazing time of year. The spring is coming. This is the time. And if you are in the mood to get out to neat places or maybe go on a walk that's led, by others and meet like-minded people and take trails. We have so many organizations in our area from the Orange County Audubon Society. I'm leading a walk for them tomorrow at 4 o'clock at the Heritage Trail at 6.5 Station. You'd all be welcome to come. And then there's the Bashigal Area Association and the Mamakating Environmental Education Center. I'm doing a walk with them Sunday at, I should know the time, shouldn't I, 10? And then we are going to try kayaking if it time permits at 2:30. If you're saying, I would love to do that and I have a kayak, bring your own. If you'd like to say like, I don't have a kayak, you can actually rent them from Meek. And if you're thinking, I don't trust this idiot because he was out kayaking last Saturday when it was 24 degrees, which was stupid. That's not like, ooh, how does he do it? And I'm like, no, that was just stupid to be out. So if you decide I'd rather do it with him like later in the year, we'll be doing that a lot. So at least once a month, we'll have the kayak thing at the Bashik. So if it's still a little too chilly for you, feel free to come on another day. And as birds migrate through, you'll see them with the Sullivan County Audubon Society and all of their trips, with the Mearns Club, with the Shawangunk Grasslands, with the Wallkill River National Wildlife Refuge, with the Gifford Pinchot Audubon Society. So or just go out yourself. I'm sure you know plenty of great spots near you. So it's a great time of year. So I hope you get out to see great things, meet great people. But all of these organizations have websites if you wanted to check out what they're doing. Okay, so flower sex. Oh, so much to talk about, but there are a few things to kind of establish like from the get-go. Okay. Um, One, flowers are amazingly diverse, but I'm not quite sure that everybody knows what I mean. So just forgive me, there's organizational things. Let's just say, all right, you're at one of these events, like these hikes or these bikes or walks or whatever, and let's just say two people meet. Maybe you're one of these two people, who knows? But anyway, two people meet, all right, and they decide they're gonna meet up later. All right, and then who knows? They share things in common, maybe hit something off. It could happen. And then right before they meet, on this first date, one of them goes out, runs into the lawn, gets a pile of grass, hands it to their prospective date. So, what impression does this make? How does the date go from here? Okay, so yeah, okay. So your your choice of that was the most positive one in the room. Everyone else was all right, but I'm gonna just say, to be fair, this person did present their prospective date with flowers. And if you don't agree with me, we just kind of have to agree on what a flower is. All right. So, out of the plants of the world, there are mosses and liverworts, which I will briefly mention. They don't grow tall, so they are non-vascular. Then there are primitive vascular plants, like there's club mosses, like you could see at the Bashkill. There's horsetails, but there's only a couple thousand species of them. There's like 11,000 species of ferns. We got a whole lot of ferns in the world. We got about 1,000 species of pine trees and their friends. So in other words, we've got 2,000 primitive vascular plants. We've got 11,000 sperm ferns. We've got 1,000 pine trees and friends. We've got, some mosses and liverworts. But then there are over 300,000 species of flower. So when you think of something green, it is almost always a flower.
Mm.
But that being said, a lot of us see flowers and don't know that we're looking at flowers. So that's what I have to go into now. Um, Here's obviously something we'll be talking about today. Let's say you're a blue flag iris. I love this plant. All right. And you're in a swamp in Orange County. And over on the other side of the swamp is a flower you've got your eye on. You kind of like the shape of the flower. You're like, I'd love to have sex with this flower. Problem is, you both have roots. Neither of you can move. So, How can you have sex with someone over there if neither of you can move? Forgive me, I'm just going to mute if there's any background. Well, it turns out the animals can help because they can move. So you say, all right, let me bribe the animals into some help with the reproduction. So I'm going to make food for them, mostly sugar water, but they can eat pollen and other things too. And so therefore, let me make food for these animals, something to catch their eye, like a nice color that they would like. So we'll use bumblebees. They love blue and purple. Okay. And even just to help them, I mean, maybe because I don't think they're all that smart, but maybe just to make them most efficient. Because if we're going to work together here, I want them to be efficient. That helps them. That helps me. I'll even make lines like, hey, Bumblebee, come this way. This isn't just some arbitrary pattern where it's like, abstract art. No, this is a purpose. This is a landing platform. Bee, come this way. Follow these lines. So there's free food here. And so the bee comes in and gets free food. But unbeknownst to it, the parts of the flower which produce pollen, which we'll be talking about in a second, then produce pollen and rub the pollen, which contains plant sperm. Okay, so to be fair, either sperm or the cells that when they divide become sperm. That then covers the bumblebee's body. All right. Bumblebee flies away, still hungry, looks for another free meal, finds a second flower that's saying, bee, come this way. The bee then enters this flower for another free meal, but now drops sperm off from flower number one onto the place where these sperm can grow into tubes, which will then access the eggs of flower number two. These two flowers have just had sex. Sperm from flower number one have just fused to ova of flower number two, even though they're rooted far apart from each other. So even though they can't move, the animals can, and they can use that to help. But this is just one of several ways to do it because the wind obviously also moves. And so while these are flowers, which we'll be talking about, so are these. All right, they don't look like flowers, these oaks, but those are flowers. All right. And so here is the pollen being produced, and the wind is going to blow it, and the plant's just hoping maybe my sperm fall by chance on the female parts of some flower down wind, and I will have then had sex with that flower. All right. Now, I'm sure you've noticed this. The wind doesn't care what color you are. So there's no point in making fancy petals. There's no point in making fragrances. The wind couldn't care less. If you're trying to attract a bumblebee, yes, by all means, be showy. Attract that insect. But since the wind doesn't care, all right, then there's no point in that. So these are flowers. These are flowering plants, and they're producing flowers. But they're not being showy because they're using the wind for pollination. So that individual who gave grass to a potential date did present flowers, just not the showiest of flowers. So I say that because when we talk about flower sex, just almost everything out there is a flower. The grasses, the oak trees are, the birch trees are, the walnut trees are. The few things that aren't would be the pine trees and their friends, the ferns and their friends, the mosses and the liverworts, etc. All right. So from here, this is the perfect jumping off point to get into flower sex, which is the name of this talk. But as much as I think some of you might regret it and tune out, I would like to veer, hopefully, like for maybe 3 minutes into what I feel is a related topic, which is how, like, there's going to be a lot of variations in how flowers have sex. But if we just talk about all plants for just a couple minutes, you're going to realize the sex gets crazy. At least I think it does. But I think that highlights then what flowers do. Flowers are different from the most primitive plants and the first plants for hundreds of millions of years. So the way that at least the seed plants and then the flowers decided to have sex is not what came before. So I would at least like to show you where the starting was before. I think that's important in appreciating what flowers do. So here's crazy. So two words real quick. The word diploid means in a cell you have two copies of each chromosome. So two sex cells come together and you get a set of chromosomes from the male, a set of chromosomes from the female. So we're used to in sexual reproduction that a cell from the male, the sperm, provides half the chromosomes. The ovum from the female provides half the chromosomes. They stick together and now we have a diploid cell with two copies of each chromosome. This is the diploid set, while the sperm and the ova, they were haploid. So for me, being an animal, the way I think of life is when I think of haploid, I think of sex. The only reason to make a haploid cell is if you want to make a sperm or an ovum and you want a reproduction. So haploid is for sex. Diploid, that's the body cells. Like skin cells are diploid, bone cells are diploid, brain cells are diploid. So being an animal, haploid is for sex, diploid is for everything else. But the plants started off in the opposite scenario, right? So algae, all right, algae, which is the ancestors of the green plants, the ones which are photosynthetic, they're the haploid ones. All right. So when they grow, they reproduce, that's haploid. When they have sex, that's when they do diploid. They just do diploid one cell. For us animals, haploid is just one cell. The sperm, the ovum, everything else, the big body is diploid. But this whole thing of algae, that's haploid. The only thing that they do for sex is that, or they then have a diploid cell here, one single cell that then makes more haploid cells. So that was the green algae. From them come the first, the most primitive plants. Liverworts are kind of like that. They have sex, but the sperm still swim. So, like in animals, the sperm need to swim with a flagella. In the first plants, the sperm need to swim with a flagella. So that's why you'll find liverworts near water, near waterfalls and all. So the sperm from the male parts have to, and so, not that you care what they look like, but since we're here. So these are the male parts called antheridia producing the sperm. They then have to swim to the archegonia producing the big eggs that you see there, right? And now look at this, the diploid part, it's still small. This is not green. This is not like free living, but it's bigger than one cell. And the algae diploid is just one cell. Here it's getting bigger, right? Now, and the reason I'm kind of doing this is there's going to be a trend that takes like 300 to 400 million years. By the time we get to these trees out there, they're diploid like me, and haploid is just for sex. But it's a 300 million year journey. So the most primitive plants, the diploid is getting bigger than it was in the algae. But it is still depending on the other. Let's talk about the moss. That's all haploid. Like for us, haploid would be if sperm grew up to be people, or if ova grew up to be people, where all of their tissues were haploid. So this is all haploid. And at the tips of these, they decide, hey, let's make sperm and ova. The sperm swim, so they need to grow near water. And what they want is for the sperm to grow, to go from here to swim from there on a neighboring stalk to find an ovum over here. All right, they fertilize it. And then out of top, you see these hairy things growing up top? That's the diploid part. So the green part is haploid, like the way in animals sperm and ova are. The diploid part, that's the part that's growing up. All right, so once again, still weird, but it's big. It's bigger than it was in the algae. If we go to ferns, all right, ferns have two stages of their life cycle. The one part that you probably don't know is this big. It's tiny, tiny, tiny. So somewhere I put a dime. I think it's a dime. Did I put a dime? La, 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 la. I swear, somewhere. These are things you really kind of need a microscope to see it. And somewhere in this video, I have it next to a dime. It's a tiny little thing. You get the idea. I swear. I swear there's a dime next. There we go. See, I told you. All right. So there are two halves of the fern life cycle. This is one. I've never seen it in the wild, but I look because it's so small. This is the haploid part. This is where the sperm and the ova are made. This is what has sex. So like when I think of like plant sex, I think like here's the blue flower over here having sex with the blue flower over here. Here, the sperm are made over here, the ova are here, they have to swim to here. That's a different type of sex. They're not going for. All right. So this is how plants started. Seed plants, like, they come hundreds of millions of years later. We get the pine trees, they use wind pollination, and then we get the animals. But the point is, over those hundreds of millions of years, there was this transition where you go from haploid being essentially the whole life cycles and diploid just being for sex. But by the time you get to the seed plants and the flowers, diploid is the whole free living organism and haploid is just for sex, the way the animals are. So that was a crazy, just like, hey, let's completely reverse the stages of our life cycle. So before I get to that, flower sex does two things that the first plants didn't do for hundreds of millions of years. One, the sperm don't swim. Okay. So here, Now, oh, you know what? Let me go back. And if I start, yeah, there we go. So the sperm, which we'll be talking about, or so pollen, the pollen will land here. We'll talk about the parts of the flower. This is the female part of the flower. The pollen will land here, and now the pollen will grow through this long tube. Why a long tube? Because the female flower wants the male pollen grains to compete against each other. Just like sperm have to swim a long way, with the idea that if there's any sperm with major mutations, they're probably not going to be the fastest swimmer. If the pollen grains have to grow through this long tube, the longer the tube, the more competition there is. So you're kind of weeding out the unhealthy sperm. So the pollen grain has these cells. Right before you get here, they undergo division. And so it's either the sperm is already there, or when they undergo division, they now produce the sperm nuclei. No flagella anymore. So while most sperm swim towards the egg, these sperm are developing in a tube that grows to the egg. So that's a little different. But they are sperm. So just, here we are talking about flower sex. It is appropriate because I just breathed in an awful lot of plant sperm, or the cells that when they divide become sperm. I mean, like flower sex is so around us, not only the beautiful colors and smells we get in spring, but the air we breathe is full of gametes, or at least the cells that when they divide become gametes. Heck, some of us may be angry because we're allergic to these. Our noses are inflamed because we're allergic to plant gametes. So they are everywhere. Right. I'm going to get back to the flower anatomy, but here's something weird is going to happen. See these two sperm nuclei? One fertilizes the egg, and then one will fertilize this stuff to make the seeds and the nutrients for the seeds. So flowering plants have what's called a double fertilization, and that makes them unique. No one else does that. So this isn't the part that you probably signed up for, everything that I just said. I just wanted to mention there's a whole lot of weird, unique things going on. But there's also then the things which are a little more easier to understand, and relate to. So that's probably going to be the majority of the talk. So let's talk about what flowers are and how they function in sex. And the ancestors of flowering plants decide to modify leaves to make a flower. So the parts of a flower are modified leaves, and they come in four circles of structures, which are called whorls. So there's the outermost whorl, whorl number 2, 3, and 4. The outermost whorl are called sepals. Okay, they are usually green. I'm going to get to exceptions in a minute, but they are usually green and usually protection. So this delicate flower, as it's developing, you don't want it to be exposed to potential predators too early. And so it's often covered with these green sepals. So if you think about roses, the rose bud will be covered with green sepals before it opens and exposes the petals. Then the next whorl are the petals, which can be colored, especially if you're trying to attract an animal. But as we'll see, there's different strategies you might have for different colors, different shapes, and maybe you want to use the wind. So maybe you don't want petals. I mean, why make fancy petals? Because the wind doesn't care if that's the fertilization you're going to. So the petals are the second whorl. The third whorl are the male structures. So each of these is called a stamen, and the pollen is made up here at an anther. Okay. And then the innermost whorl is called a carpel, and a flower may have one or multiple carpels. And the pollen will land on this stigma. The pollen tube will go through the style and then fertilize the ovary. Right. So there's all sorts of things, but like if anyone really wanted to, like at the end of class, I could pull it out real quick. If you wanted to look at a flower under the microscope, here are the innermost two whorls. The female whorl is the center, and then the male whorl is around that. So here you could see here the male whorl. All right, these are the anthers from the stamen. This is where meiosis is occurring to produce the haploid cells, which will become the pollen. Right, and then in the center, then you get the ovary. And so here's the ovaries and here's the eggs. So plants do have sex. They make sex cells. They're unlike the first plants in that the sperm don't need to swim anymore. So they're not flagellated, which is important now that you're living on land. Tying your reproduction to water is a limitation, especially in arid areas of of the world. So that was one great advance that they have. And one of the cool things that, I think a lot of people might just say, oh, look at this flower. It's so pretty. But knowing what you do, like it's like, okay, well, the sepals would be the green things down there, but look, here's the petals. Oh, but look, see, these are the male parts. All right, those are the stamens, and those are the anthers where the pollen is being made. And here in the center, that's the female part. So that's where the pollen would land on the stigma. The pollen tubes would have to grow through this really long style and compete with each other. So if there's any unhealthy pollen, they're not going to do that well. So they have to get all the way down in there before they can become the fertilize the egg, right? So plants have sex, which actually did get Linnaeus. You may know Linnaeus back in the day. He's the one who came up with the genus species name like Homo sapiens, genus species. Linnaeus, who came up with that, he studied a lot of flowers. I'm sorry, I think this is hilarious. Back in the day, when you went to a Sunday service, very often the person leading the Sunday service would like yell at you, you unchaste people, like you sinful people. You should be more like these pure, chaste, perfect plants. And then Linnaeus started describing the sex that plants have, and he got into a bit of trouble because of that. So, just, yeah, I guess you got to know your audience. But that was a surprise to a lot of people. A lot of people just say, like, oh, look at these nice flowers. These are here purposefully. Now, before we start getting into what I think is the really cool stuff, just a couple of definitions, because let's say you go on a date, all right, and you want to give your date perfect flowers, like perfect flowers. It turns out it's not that hard. Okay. And the reason I say that is because perfect flowers, it's a definition. Perfect flowers have all four of those layers. So if you have all four of these whorls, you are perfect. So you have sepals, you have well, sepals and petals help, but particularly you have both the male and the female parts. So a perfect flower is a hermaphroditic flower, having both male and female parts. Not all flowers are perfect. All right. And so in a perfect flower, you are producing both the male pollen and the female ova. But you don't have to make perfect flowers. You could make unisexual flowers. All right. These are then called imperfect. So maybe this is a staminate flower that has the male parts, the stamens producing pollen, but that flower doesn't produce eggs. Maybe it's a pistillate or carpellate flower. And there's a whole lot of terminology. They are often, those two terms used interchangeably. That now just has the female parts producing ovaries and ova only. So if you decide, I am going to make an imperfect flower that just has one type of gamete, that's making one type of gamete, how would that work? Well, it depends. If you're a monoecious plant, then what you could do is you have a whole bunch of flowers on your plant body. You could say, let me make a male one over here and a female over here. And so now you have male and female organs on the same plant, but they're just not in the same flower. All right. So corn, squash, melons, cucumbers, pumpkins, zucchini, oak, birch, walnuts, beech, and alder, their flowers have gender. They're either male flowers only or female flowers only, but you can find both on the same plant. So it's called a monoecious plant. Or you could be so here are these oaks, all right? There are flowers here. They're wind pollinated, so they don't look showy. Some of them are male, some of them are female, all right? But none of them are both, as a perfect flower would be. But then you could be a dioecious flower in that you could say, I'm going to make a male plant and I'm going to make a female plant. All right. And all the flowers on the male plant are going to produce pollen. All the flowers on the female plant are going to produce ova. So asparagus, spinach, stinging nettle, bayberry, cannabis, poplar, aspen, holly, spicebush, bayberry, they are dioecious plants. Okay. So when it comes to flowers, there's just options, right? So there are hundreds of thousands of species of flower. We're already halfway done almost. So obviously we're not going to get through all of them. So just some examples, then we'll start getting into pollinators, which I think is really exciting. So this is a cattail. What am I looking at? Well, a lot of flowers, all right? So they're just making very simple flowers, which will be wind pollinated. No petals needed. All right, there's no pollinator that I'm asking to come by, so I don't need petals. So I'll just make the sex parts, all right, for a cattail flower. Oh, and that's only the female. There were male flowers here, which you'll see in a second. All right. So here, just female, female, female. And these are actually now developing seeds. So then, well, how did it come? So there's female flowers, female flowers, female flowers, female flowers. If you go earlier in the season, that's the brown part. You see this brown part right there? This is what it looks like first. All right. This is just earlier in the summer. And look what's on top of it, another set of flowers. So there's a lot of flowers, like gazillions. So those are all flowers, those are all male flowers. And if you hit them, which I will do in a second, then you'll just see all of this pollen being released. There you go. So in this long cattail, you've got a gazillion male flowers up top that produce pollen. The pollen blows in the wind, all right, and then will land on the more tubular structures underneath. All right. So that's where the female flowers are. And then that's, seeds will develop there. So, this is what you're looking at with a lot of cattails. And plants can have different strategies. I am not going to touch on all of the strategies here. But do you want to fertilize yourself? Like if you're making both male and female gametes, do you want to be able to fertilize yourself? Some plants, sure. Why rule out your options if you're all by yourself? Right? You could still have offspring produce seeds, even if you're the only member of your species to be there. Like that would still, be possible. But then some flowers would like to limit that. So how could you limit your pollen fertilizing your female flowers and encourage then outcrossing? Well, you could do it a couple of ways where you could shift the timing. So when are the female flowers receptive? That could be a different time when you're producing male pollen. So your male pollen isn't going to fertilize your female flowers because they're being produced at a different time. There could be genetic mechanisms where your male pollen doesn't grow very well through that long style, and that you would encourage outcrossing. So there's, different strategies that plants could have, but that would then take us a little afield. So that's the basic flower, but like I said, you can change it. So here, for example, you would say, here's marsh marigold, an early spring flower, and you see, look at the beautiful yellow petals. Oh, wait, those aren't the petals. Those are sepals. So sepals are usually the green parts, and the petals are colorful. But like the poinsettia you get at your house in December, those are red sepals. Those aren't petals. So there are variations. All right, so there's 300,000 kinds of flowers. There's variations. The sepals can be colorful, as they are here. If you look at this water lily, the spatterdock, the yellow, those are sepals. The petals actually look like the reproductive parts in there. All right, so the petals actually look like stamens. Those are sepals here. Here in pokeweed, which makes berries, those are sepals. Of course, if I'm going to talk about sepals, I have to do the last two episodes here. So here, flowers vary. So let's talk about skunk cabbage, which, to give it a shout out, this very often is the very first flower you will see in a year. All right. The reason that is because it actually produces heat. A lot of plants, when they store sugar in their roots, it's so that they'll grow new leaves, they'll grow, they'll get tall. Whereas me, I want to keep a steady temperature. So when it's cold out, I just say, hey, I got sugar in my muscles. Muscles use the sugar and contract. Like, why? I just do it, just contract. And I release heat as a waste product. The same way that a light bulb, or like this light, if I touch it, it'll be warm. I don't want it to be warm. I want it to project light, not heat. But anytime you do anything with energy, you do generate waste heat. It's a law of the universe. Your car engine, you don't want to make heat. You want all that gas, which is expensive, to push your car forward. But you can't help it. It will be waste. Some of it will be wasted as heat. Your hood feels weight. So these plants say, hey, you know what? Let's just start burning sugar and make some heat. And they break through the snow. So very often there's still snow on the ground, but they are the first plants to flower. Not only does that let them grow up, so they're getting sunlight before they otherwise would, but pollinators are freezing. It's February, it's early March. So they've created this little secluded place from the wind that is warm. All right, these plants can briefly produce as much heat as a small mammal, like for equivalent body size. So when I say heat, they're producing heat. And pollinators will go then inside and stay in the place that's warm. And if they get pollen on them here, which is essentially once again sperm, and then they fly to another place to get warm, now they have dropped off sperm from flower number one to flower number two. All right. So not only is that really cool, those are sepals. So here's a very specialized flower. Just because there was that generalized, here's the structure of a flower, doesn't mean there can't be a whole lot of creativity going on here. So these sepals are breaking through the snow as they generate as much heat as a similarly sized mammal would, providing a warm hideaway for pollinators. All right, and the petals are not uh, uh, as significant here. Inside here, you could see the places where the sex organs are producing pollen. I have pictures of those. They're in there somewhere. All right, so talking about sepals, that's really cool. But we do want to transition into petals. But before we do, orchids. When I look at an orchid, all right, orchids are crazy. So let's just look at some orchids. What am I looking at? All right. Well, one petal may be modified as like a landing platform. So that's weird. Well, let me finish talking about sepals first. All right, but then we'll get that's crazy. But here, out of all of the thousands of species of this, if we're asking what am I looking at here, you're actually looking at both petals and sepals. All right. So what we call the flower is not like green sepals on the outside, then petals in the inside. It's actually the petals are the sepals and petals are both, as I just had a second ago. So here, keep missing it. So that's a petal, that's a petal. All right, but that's a sepal, that's a sepal, that's a sepal. And they can be the same color or they can be different colors. And then there can be more petals like the ones which are modified to be a landing platform. So the first drawing is what you'll find in most biology textbooks, like the green sepals in a layer, the nice flat petals in a layer. But clearly plants can be creative with this. Both the sepals and petals can work together, and petals can have all sorts of unique shapes. The sex parts can have unique shapes as well. So bittersweet nightshade, all right? What you're seeing, the petals are purple, and the androecium, the stamens making the pollen, they briefly form this cone structure. So this looks like part of the flower, like in the petal realm, but this is actually the next world of structures, the male ones. Okay. And then we were talking about dogwoods earlier. What are we looking at? Petals clearly? Actually, sometimes what you have is, let's say the flowers are all going to be concentrated here. Well, then if that's a flower, that's a flower, that's a flower, like what's that? Like that doesn't belong to any one of these little flowers. Then you can have another bract, another leaf-like structure that wasn't part of the flower produce, some color like this white petal thing. So it looks like it's a petal on one flower, but actually it's not even part of the official flower. It's a bract that's surrounding many flowers. So there's a whole lot of things going on. And look at yarrow would be the same way. So here, all the flowers are in the middle, right? See all the little flowers? So these white structures, that's actually not pertaining to that flower or that flower. That's another set of modified things that don't even fit into our sepal petal, set there. All right. So that was a little bit about flower structure. Now let's get into pollination and some of those things. So we think of these as flowers, all right? And they're colorful because they're trying to attract animals. Like this is trying to attract a beetle, this is trying to attract a butterfly or a bee or a hummingbird, and we will talk about that soon. But as I said, these are flowers too. All right, so the definition of a flower doesn't include being colorful or smelling nice or being pretty. Flower just means you're making these sex organs where the pollen is going to be able to fertilize ova. So some are pollinated by wind. There is an advantage to wind pollination. You don't have to feed the animals, right? Because the regular flowering plants are bribing animals, like, hey, I'm going to feed you if you help me have sex. All right, but then you have to like depend on the animals, and we'll get to how unreliable that can be. So then there's wind pollination. But the problem is, and some of you, your allergies might already tell you this, right? But soon, what will your deck look like? That's your deck. That's all sperm, or or the cells that when they divide become sperm. That's wasted. That's not going to fertilize anything. So the plants that made that sperm, they've wasted energy, right? And then you look at your car, all right? That's a lot of failed reproductive attempts. Look, everything is yellow. You go on a river or a lake, look at it, you think, ooh, it's polluted. No, that's just sperm, all right? Just pollen is being produced. And so if you're not going to spend energy on the pretty petals and the nectar, then you spend your energy somewhere else in the pollen, and you've got to make huge amounts of it because if you're wind pollinated, you're relying on dumb luck, right? So if I'm a male flower here, all right, and I'm gonna, produce pollen that's released into the wind, I'm hoping that by dumb luck, the wind blows that sperm and hits a female flower somewhere downwind of me of the same species. That is not likely. And so you've got to produce a lot of pollen in order for that um, to happen. So wind pollination is wasteful. So all of this is, highly nitrogenous pollen, which took some energy to make, that will never make seeds and thus, are not advancing that plant. So plants are going to waste energy, whether they're feeding the animals or they're making huge quantities of gametes because of the wind. Beyond that, flowers have some thinking to do. Like, what season do I want to flower in? And that can, tie with your growth cycle. So, like in early spring, the leaves aren't out yet on the trees. So you can do a whole lot of growing because the sunlight's reaching the forest floor, right? But come late, June, you might not be getting much light at all because there's this dense leaf canopy. So you might be timing your life cycle and when you flower to that. Where like I'm going to be in the forest, but I'm going to get reproduce early before their leaves come out. So here are some spring flowers like trout lily. We get a lot of nice patch of trout lily right behind the building here, mayapple, etc. You also might be thinking of your competition. So if there's a whole lot of flowers in my area that bloom in June, I have to compete with pollinators if I flower in June. But if there's a window where there aren't as many flowers are flowering, then the pollinators are mine. The bees are starving. They're going to come to me. Or one of the plants we just saw was mayapple. If you're going to rely on animals to eat your kids and spread the seeds, well, then once again, that might be tied to like animals. Like when would animals be most likely to, eat these fruits and spread them to? So, if you're going to time um, at a time when you bloom, there's advantages and disadvantages to some of these things. There might be wetter times, there might be drier times, etc. So, plants choose when to blossom. Some are only early spring, some are only late spring, some will bloom throughout the summer. So there's that. And then there's all of these variations like, some flowers. All right. And here's just another example. We're going to be focusing on the petals for a while. But I think it's kind of fun once you know about the layers of flowers. You say, well, let me look at this flower. Okay, there's the petals. Yeah, there's the male parts. So there's the female part there. And you're like, oh, all right. I thought they were decorations before. It's like, no, flowers are trying to have sex. This is, their structures all have a reason behind them. So if we were to then look at um, flowers and we were to count their parts. Some flowers, we just name them as irregular. All right. So like some things have like 5 petals in a row or 6 petals in a row, but then some just have some petals fused and are irregular. So here, like butter and eggs. All right. So there's just fusion going on there. So that's interesting. That's an interesting choice. Why would I do that? Well, it might be tied to my pollinator. So for example, like bees are strong. As far as bugs go, bees are strong. If I want to be picky, if I want bees to help me have sex, but not flies, all right, and I'll talk about why that you might want that, then I might want to build a flower that only bees can get into. All right, that it has a specific shape, or to push the petals across so that you can get to the nectar and the pollen inside. You might need some strength. So you're looking for bees, or you're not looking for the flies or many of the beetles. So when we're looking at flower structure, right? So there's going to be a tube where the nectar is. You want, the a pollinator to reach there. If you're protecting your nectar, maybe it doesn't evaporate. But there's a whole lot of thinking. It's not just, like, oh, let me be artistic and make, a flower with this shape, with this color. No, there's a plan here. Why is this a better way to reproduce? And we'll be talking about hummingbirds and butterflies with their long bills and proboscis in a second. But there's a plan here. All right. So it matters what your flower looks like. There's an advantage to this plant to have flowers which are shaped that way. So some flowers are irregular. All right. So here's cow wheat, I think, and butternuts. But then there are flowers that have two petals. There are flowers which have three petals. I think I saw two, yeah. Yeah, so here is cypress spurge. Look at that, two petals. You can have two petals. And green, we'll be talking about color in just a few minutes. So you can have two petals. You can have three petals. So a bunch of flowers have three petals. All right. And then you can guess where the rest of this video is going. You can have four, you can have five. And so there are decisions being made here. So the flowers are saying, all right, what structure do I want? And very often that's matching to the pollinators. And that's what we're coming up with next. But you can say, oh, look, there's five. And if now there's apps. But does anyone ever, like, my favorite was not the Peterson flower guys, but Newcomb. Does anyone know Newcomb? Anyone? Oh yeah, because that's what, like, you would get a code, like instead of like the Peterson guide, you would have to, like, oh, let me go to the white flower section, just go page after page. Whereas the Newcomb guide, it was, all right, count the petals. All right, so if it's five, that's the first number of your 3-digit code, and then the next one is look at the leaves. Are they like opposite or alternate? That's the second code. Are you a 2 or a 3? And then is it like smooth the edges or is it toothed? That's your next number. And so you're like, aha, my flower is code 533, and then you're like, then you go to that page. So just counting petals in the old days before there was the app, like now, just I have the app. You point the app at the flower and it tells you what it is. Back in the day, that was not the way it was. And so you're like counting the petals. That was one thing. You're like, oh, this is one of my fives. This is one of the 7 or more here. But you can see, so there's all sorts of decisions being made and lots of flowers that have many petals. Okay. So beyond just the number of petals, we want to start thinking about who do I want to help me have sex? All right, because let's say I make it easy to access the pollen and the nectar. Fine. All right. But if I make it easy, that means any old pollinator can come. All right. So it could you could get bees, you could get flies, you could get beetles, you could get ants, you could get a whole bunch of things. And like a bunch of different bees, a bunch of different beetles, etc. Now the thing is, this pink flower wants a pollinator to take its pollen to another pink flower of the same species. It doesn't want it to go to a mint. It doesn't want the pollen to end up, in a tulip, all right, because that's just wasted, all right? This pollen is not going to produce any seeds if it ends up on a mint flower or a tulip flower or whatever. So what you would love in a perfect world is to have pollinator fidelity, where the pollinator that visits this pink swamp rose will go straight from here to another swamp rose and drop off the pollen from swamp rose number 1 to swamp rose number 2. That's what you want. All right. But if you're easy to pollinate, so this is Japanese knotweed. So if you're easy to pollinate, Japanese knotweed's pretty easy. Everybody comes. So if you just look at who's on here, there's all these different wasps, there's all these different bees, there are ants, there are beetles. Everyone's pollinating this. So your problem then is they're all different shapes and sizes. And so, like, how can you assure that they'll be faithful just to you? Well, Japanese knotweed decides, I'm going to bloom in autumn when most of the other flowers are gone. So these pollinators, they don't have much choice. I'm pretty sure they're going to go from one Japanese flower to another Japanese knotweed to another Japanese knotweed because there's just not many other flowers around. Or I'm going to produce a whole lot at once. So that's how this is trying to hedge its bets. But a lot of other flowers, that's the thing that you're scared of. And I think this is the right video. Yeah. So what the flower doesn't want is for bumblebee to go from the red flower, all right, to go over here, because then you've just wasted your pollen. You fed the bee, you gave it food, you put your gametes in its bristles, all right, but now it dropped it off at the wrong species. So it does you no good. You fed a bee and you got nothing out of it. So how do you try to be faithful? Well, we have what are called pollination syndromes. So if I look at, once again, blue flags are one of my favorites. If I look at blue flag, I already know stuff. One, it's got a complex form, and to get at the nectar, these petals are, close to each other. You'd have to push them apart. I'm thinking bee. I'm thinking that this flower has made a decision. I'm not attracting the butterflies. I'm not attracting the beetles. I'm not attracting the flies. I'm going after bees. Bees are strong enough to get to where they go, but not other. This flower is excluding many other pollinators. Plus, it's blue. Bees love blue. Bees love blue. They love yellow. All right. So bees see those colors. They even see an ultraviolet. And so very often here you see these blue lines. This plant is speaking to bees. Bees, this flower is for you. So it's trying to specialize into something that bees would like. But you've got more decisions. So let's say you're going to be pollinated by bees. What does that mean? Because this bee is huge. That's a big bee. So, and so here, there's lots of things going on, but bees have different sizes, they have different mouth parts. So if you're saying where is the nectar? All right, if you're trying to specialize in one pollinator, then the shape of your flower is adapted to its mouth parts, that its mouth parts can easily reach the nectar in your flower. This bee is bigger than this bee, these bumblebees, right? So they're a little different. And I'm sorry, I just love these videos here. We're somewhere, I swear. Yeah, just look at and it's a team. This is something which evolved in the age of dinosaurs. And this is why the flowering plants have hundreds of thousands of species, and all of the other plants are like nothing in comparison in terms of number of species. This works. The animals are helping these stationary plants have sex. So it's a team. The plants want the animals to be successful. The plants are rooting for the bees. The plants are going to have sex without the bees. And the bees are rooting for the plants. All right. The more of the plant that there are, the more food. So it's a teamwork. And so that's why the bumblebees have hairs, right? Because it's to trap the pollen. They want to be better at pollinating the plants. They're rooting for the plants. And in the same way, a pollinator is going to be faithful, all right, where there's only the bees can reach these flowers or whatever, then it's going to be certain or increase the odds that the bee will go from a member of this species to another member of that species. Now, here's another bee. This is invasive. So here's an interesting question. Bumblebees were native to North America, and all the native North American plants adapted their shapes to the native pollinator, the bumblebee. And then the Europeans bring in the honeybee from another continent, all right, that has different mouth parts. Europeans also then bring in these foreign flowers. And so now you have the foreign pollinators, which are helping the spread of the foreign flowers at the expense of the native pollinators and the native flowers. So just take clovers, okay? Purple clover, red clover. It's native. Bumblebees like that one. But white clover came from Europe with the honeybee that came from Europe. And so as we go out there, there's different sizes of bees. So what are they pollinating? It matters. The flowers have adapted their shape for the shape of the bee, right? So different types of bees are going to favor different kinds of different kinds of flowers. And that's especially true with these guys, because there's a whole lot of bees that no one thinks of. These are the little ones. These are called the sweat bees. There's a whole bunch of these. They're great. You can have little houses for them. They come in colors. All right. But so bees pollinate flowers, but there's a whole lot of different kinds of bees. All right. And so some are much smaller than others. So when you see a lot of smaller flowers, they're also bee pollinated, but it wouldn't be honeybees and bumblebees, etc. Okay. Does anyone know what kind of bee that is? Great. It was a trick question. So bees are scary because they can sting you. So I avoid bees when I can, and a lot of animals do. But then some flies have figured that out. Hey, if you get yellow and dark stripes on your abdomen, people stay away from you. So a lot of flies look like bees but aren't. All right, so they don't sting. I know they're flies because one of the defining features of the flies is unlike most insects, which have two pairs of wings, flies have one. All right, so there's other ways too, but here you see these one pair of wings. This is a fly that looks like a bee. So there are hover flies, there are bee flies. They are not bees, but they can also then pollinate. So you see bees pollinating flowers, and then you can see these hover flies also at the flowers as well. So some uh, flowers are fly pollinated. Look what it's on. It's on a rather simple flower. You see all the sex parts there? They're just out in the air. No tubes, no enclosed structures. So flies just aren't as skilled at being pollinators as bees are. So if you see a complex flower that's got a weird shape, a lot going on, like you're thinking bee, all right, where something that's more open is inviting more pollinators. Bees can come, but now so can other things like beetles and flies. Another thing about flies, because going back to skunk cabbage, uh, which, why not? It's such a great flower. It looks ugly, like it looks like rotting flesh. And if you were to smell it, I mean, hence the name skunk cabbage, not a thing that you would put in a bouquet. It stinks. All right. It looks like rotting flesh. Why? Because it's not attracting bees. It's attracting flies. The flies that go to rotting flesh. That's a choice. Look like rotting flesh, smell like rotting flesh, and you're choosing the pollinators that like rotting flesh. All right. I don't know which flower this was. It was an ornamental one, so I don't know the real species. But like it had the weirdest. It smelled like body or like sweat. And then once again, it's attracting flies. All right, like bee flowers, they smell sweet and very fragrant. Not flies. They're going for different odors. And if you just smell a flower, it's like that's odd. Like I'm not sure if I like that. I have to think about that. Like it's probably not going for the bees. It's probably going for flies. So that's a pollinator syndrome. Okay, and there are more. The first moths, and I'm talking about moths first because moths predate butterflies by a lot. Like there are far more moths in the world than there are butterflies. Most of the caterpillars you've ever seen in your life developed into a moth and not a caterpillar, and not a butterfly. The first moths had just regular insect mouthparts. But then somewhere along the way, they said, you know what? Let's develop this. Let's make our mouth parts really highly coiled in what's called a proboscis. And if you have this highly coiled proboscis, all right, so like there are moths alive today where their mouth parts look like this. That's kind of like more like a general bug type of thing. But then the other ones, they got this long proboscis. So now, if there's a flower which is tube shaped, the beetles can't get in there, the flies can't get in there, and a long narrow tube, a bee can't get in there. But you with your narrow tongue, look at that tongue. It's not a tongue, it's a proboscis. But like, look, you can get deep inside a flower, reach a nectar that others can't. So now flowers can specialize in, so these one wouldn't. So now we're seeing, bees and butterflies at the same flower. But that's not what a flower wants, because if a pollinator is going to visit um, any old flower, then you're going to be spreading your pollen out. So a lot of these tube-shaped flowers are shooting for yeah, look at this moth. Look at that proboscis. All right, so imagine the flowers that it can now harvest nectar from. Now, a lot of moths come out only at night. So there are flowers that only bloom at night. They tend to be white, light colored as you might imagine. Once again, the flower has a strategy. I don't want to attract every pollinator because then my pollen's going to be going this way and this way. I want the pollinator to go from a member of my species to another member of my species. And so if you're only coming out at night, all right, and you've got a long tubular flower, then that's going to attract the moths. All right, and so now you're likely that this moth will go from you to another white flower of your species because there aren't that many which are blooming at at night. Okay. Now you can get a proboscis and reach inside a long tube, or you can have a long tongue. There are two types of birds that have really long tongues, woodpeckers and hummingbirds. And when I mean long tongue, it not only stretches the length of the bill, but then it goes inside the head. It'll then go around the skull and end at the eye. so that a hummingbird or a woodpecker can then extract that tongue so that it goes inches beyond the tip. Right? So the bill is long of both hummingbirds and woodpeckers, but the tongue is even longer because at rest it actually is couched here. And so if you see this flower, you're thinking long tube. I'm either thinking butterfly or hummingbird. And the fact that it's red, same thing. Bees don't see red. Bees see ultraviolet that we don't see, but to them, red looks black. So red flowers, they're not the best for bees, all right, but they're good for hummingbirds and butterflies. So here we have these long red tubular flowers, right? And somewhere in the next video, and here you'll see like, oh, here's by the Delaware. Here we see a hummingbird is adept at feeding on that. And when you look at some of these flower shapes, you can almost say like, what's going on here? All right, like what's going on with this? I'm like, oh, you know what? I think I get it. I think this flower wants to be pollinated by someone who's hovering right in front of it. Because then if you're hovering, that's where the pollen is getting rubbed on your face. All right, so this flower is saying, like, I'm going to feed the hummingbird. The hummingbird's going to put its face there. I'll rub sperm on the face of the hummingbird. The hummingbird then goes to another flower, and then the sperm gets dropped off. So there's a strategy to all of this. Okay. Um, like I said there, and before I get back to hummingbirds and like, then you see all these lines, which are called like nectar guides. Here, just some of these we can see. They're like all of these are messages, like, "Hey, come this way." Then there's even more things that you could put on your flower. Like you could have like little hairs. Like, look how fuzzy that flower is. That's going to help prevent the evaporation of the nectar, may give pollinators a place, a foothold and the like. Here we look at white beard tongue. Also, yeah, there's some fuzziness going on in there, et cetera. But getting back to here. All right. So, hummingbirds are big at helping plants have sex. But if you now there's more strategy here. Look at the bills. There's all of these different shapes. Some are short and straight, some are long and straight, some curve down. There's a hummingbird, and I wasn't able to get its picture. I think I briefly saw it go by, but you know hummingbirds. This was in Ecuador. It has an upward curved bill, and there's a flower that has an upward curved tube. So they've committed, both of them. All right, there aren't many flowers that hummingbird can pollinate, and there aren't many pollinators that can pollinate that flower. So the two of them have said, "Hey, let's work together. You bird and me, the flower." All right, and we want both of us to be successful. That way, there'll be enough food for you and enough pollinators for us. But you're committing because once you have your bill turn up, you're not going to access as many flowers as other ones can. So just like there's different kinds of bees and different kinds of flowers, which would be pollinated by each one. Look, then there's different kinds of hummingbird bills. There's something in the chat. Oh, good afternoon. Yeah, Adrian already said that. I thought it was something. And if you ever go, there's Ecuador. They do this a couple places, but in Ecuador, they just feed the hummingbirds all the time, and the hummingbirds come because they know it's free food. So then you can like put these little things in your hand, and all these like little hummingbirds just come and land on you, and just like it's just wonderful because they're just such delicate things. So it's wild. So yeah, like it's wild. Like, anyway, so hummingbirds are good at that, but then so are other birds. Like, look, here's a bird called the banana quit. But look, it's got a curved bill, and then it's got some flowers that have a modified shape that it can access. There are beetles which can pollinate flowers. Wasps can, like a lot of wasps can. But going back to the orchids, there are orchids that try to look, as we can tell, like female wasps. So what happens is male wasps come and mate with the flowers because the flowers look like female wasps. And while they're mating with the flowers, then there's pollen that ends up on the male wasp. The male wasp goes off to try to mate with another flower, drops pollen off. And so now these flowers have, pollinated and spread, even though now they haven't fed the wasp. They didn't have to because the wasp thought it was mating. Ants can also serve as a pollinator, but I hate to be judgy, but to be honest, they suck at it. All right, they're just not that good. So this is often accidental. There aren't many flowers which are shooting for ants. Like ants are kind of often the accidental one. Um, Ants don't travel very far. So if you say, "Ooh, wouldn't it be great if a pollinator could take pollen from me, this flower, to that flower over there?" Ants don't travel as far as the bugs that can fly. So often that's not as helpful. And often ants are just lazy and they've got these sharp mouth parts. The ant might just get lazy and say, "I'm just going to eat through the flower and suck the nectar out from the bottom," which doesn't help the flower at all. So while ants can pollinate, and there are good examples, and like maybe in the tropics, there's a few more, it's not the most um, reliable thing. As I start to sum up, just one last thing. When we talk about bugs, and I was, because I was talking about the bees and the butterflies and the beetles and the flies and the ants, we then talk about the problem that bugs are having. A term that I'm starting to see more and more is the insect apocalypse. We're worried about bird numbers dropping, but insect numbers are really dropping too. That's one of the reasons that bird numbers are dropping, among others. And one of the reasons is we're getting really good at making pesticides. There are bugs that we don't like. We don't like lanternflies. We don't like the spongy moths. We don't like a lot of these bugs. And so we've developed pesticides which are pretty good at killing them. Those are all dead spongy moths on this tree trunk. So we're getting good. But the problem is then these pesticides are just all in nature, right? And the neonicotinoid ones are affecting um, the nicotinic receptors for the autonomic nervous system. I have a video on it. You don't want to hear about it, so we'll just skip over that. So we put pesticides everywhere, and often in places you don't realize, like on seeds. Let's say, "Oh, I want to have a garden this year." So I go to a store. All right, let's say it's a more generalized store as opposed to, like a higher end nursery. And I'm just going to get some seeds. They've probably already been treated by insecticides. So when you plant the seeds and it rains, that insecticide then dissolves, gets into the soil, the plant grows, sucks it up. And so now it's in the nectar, it's in the leaves. And so let's say, "Oh, look, here's a bee coming to the flowers." Well, if there's been pesticides, the bees are picking up the pesticide that you meant to kill the pest, not the bees, but you're actually helping to kill the pollinators. So we're not quite sure all of this chemical, all these chemicals that we're putting into the environment, what they're doing. Because we're getting some too. I mean, I'm worried about the bees, but these neonicotinoids that we're using for insect pests, they're in your body, they're in mine. They don't have the same effect on us that they do in insects, but they do have effects. There are some that aren't safe to be around humans. So we are living in this chemical world, right? And these pesticides are getting in the birds, they're getting in the humans, they're getting the bugs. So this whole how are plants reproducing between the invasive species that we're bringing, because just that's something I want to talk about next week, and it's something I'm trying to wrap my head around. I know, Nancy, we've had this conversation. Like if I go if I go to a wild space and I say like, "Oh, all these wild flowers, and here are the two invasives that are threatening," but the more you look into it, you're like, "Oh wait, no, that's not native. Oh, that one's not native. That one's not native." And I thought there were two non-native flowers in this field. It turns out like a third of them are. Like there are just so many invasives. But now think about what that does. Each flower has a shape of the flower adapted to a specific pollinator. Not only that, the leaves are adapted with toxins to ward off insect bugs that would eat it. And then the bugs have adapted to those leaves that grow in its habitat. And we're just mixing it all up. We're taking plants and flowers from this part of the world, planting them over here, bringing insects from this part of the world. And they've spent, thousands to tens of thousands of years adapting to specific syndromes, partnerships. And we're changing all of it in all such a short order, plus throwing in the habitat loss and the climate change and everything else that we're doing. So, for those of you who are interested in wildlife, whether it be the birds or the flowers, and I know a lot of you are, because not only we have this conversation often, we have this conversation earlier today. Um, Good for you, because we need that. I mean, there's so much going on, and the wild world is being threatened from so many different directions. Um, so, best work to your efforts. We were talking earlier about native plant sales and the like, just all great things. So, there's a fascinating world out there with how plants have sex with each other, given that they can't move. And a lot of this involves the wind, but a lot of it involves all of these diverse animals. And it's a fascinating story. And so I hope this enriches your appreciation of the flowers in your garden and the ones that grow near your house this spring. And, maybe you notice a little more like, oh, yeah, look, the color of this flower matches the pollinators coming to it. And this pollinator is coming to this flower and this one to this one. But that wraps up the flower sex talk for this week. Going to talk about invasive species next week. Did anybody have any questions?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I do have a question. Where
Sure.
where would you place Jack in the pulpit, which is a plant that can be female one year, male next year,
Ooh.
and
So, you know what? I'll be honest. One of the reasons I want to branch out and do more talks, like this one is the first time I've done this talk. But when doing a talk for the first time, it did run about an hour. But when I was going into the monoecious versus dioecious, there's more options where you could, like, instead of being like an all male plant and all female plant or having male and female flowers, you could be a mostly female plant with a few male flowers. You could be a mostly like there is more out there. And your question is to whether you can do it in different years, or some individuals are either male or female, but then there are some individuals which are bisexual. Um,
don't
you know,
have it.
there's as many examples as there are plants. So if you would like to share something with Jack in the Pulpit, I don't know anything specifically about that, so feel free to share. But there are more options out there as plants explore, how to reproduce. Did you have something else you wanted to share?
I was just trying to figure out where that would fit in your categories because it changes sex depending on what the needs are.
Hmm.
Because the female needs so much starch to produce eggs that
Hmm.
she doesn't have enough, she'll stay male for as no enough amount of time until she has that energy stored up, and then she'll become female.
Thank you. Fish do that. I did not know about that. I really appreciate that because I didn't know that. So I have nothing useful I can tell you. But like fish will do that where they'll be like male for the first part of their life, but then female later. But they want to be female later because then they'll be bigger and have more resources. The fact that plants would do that too, that's fascinating. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
I have a question.
Sure.
Actually, my wife has a question. She's asking me to ask it.
Sure.
Self-pollinating plants.
Uh-huh.
How does that work?
So, so let me just step back and talk about inbreeding for a second. So inbreeding, there are disadvantages. But then in the long term, there can be advantages too. So you could look at it from different points of view. If I am inbreeding, I know for a fact that I have bad genes. I do. All right. And whoever I picked as a partner has bad genes. If we're not related, odds are my bad genes are not the same as theirs. So even though both of us give our kids bad genes, we won't give them the same bad genes. If my partner is closely related to me, then odds are my bad genes are theirs too. And we're giving our kids the same. And now our kids are sick. But then these bad genes leave the population because if our kids now have these bad genes, but they don't live to reproduce. Now there are fewer bad genes in the population. So over time, if you like dandelions look like they're having sex with other dandelions. They're just self-pollinating, all right? And obviously very successful. So, but here's a way now that you're now genetically pure, all right, and you're not having pollen, which might bring in bad genes from someone else there. So you can self-pollinate. The trick would be how you don't self-pollinate. Like if you're making both flowers with both male and female parts, and they're right next to each other, it's very easy for you to pollinate yourself. And that's why if you don't want to pollinate yourself, maybe you shift the timing. Like the male part produces pollen a week earlier than the female part is receptive to pollen. Or there can actually be genes which mean that you're self-sterile. And I'm sure there's more. Once again, there's hundreds of thousands of species of plants out there. I'm sure there's different strategies there. But as far as how it would work, it's actually easier to be capable of fertilizing yourself if you have male and female parts right next to each other. The harder thing would be how do you prevent that from happening or limiting?
Thank you.
Did you have anything else on your question?
We enjoy your talks a great deal.
Oh, thank you very much, Wayne. I appreciate it. I love to give the talks. Love having you. Thank you for coming. Anybody else? Any questions?
Are there any like vegetarian bats around here that don't just insist on?
Oh, I thank you. I completely skipped the bats. Yeah, so bats can help pollinate night flowering plants as well, including like the flying foxes. Like the first bats didn't come out at night and eat bugs, and there are things like flying foxes that still fly around in the day, eat fruits, and they often pollinate plants. So bats can also be pollinators. I don't think local. I don't think, but I'm not. Yeah, I don't think. I don't think local. Yeah, they're more tropical Indonesian. Yeah, but bats can also be pollinators. Yeah.
Typically see ants going towards peonies.
Hmm.
What is like the actual pollinator for peony?
I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
They're so like dense. I don't
Yeah.
know what would actually get you.
Huh. That would be great. Like I said, one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk is because I'd realized I was like, wow. Like once you give the talk, you're like, I don't know that answer. I don't know. And then, so that'll be the motivation to go out and research more.
What was the question about the peony?
The question was that one of the attendees often sees ants in the vicinity of peonies, and whether ants are pollinating or whether peonies are typically pollinated by something else. And I don't know.
Peonies might have the seed for the elaiosome. Maybe that's why they're.
Like they help to open up the peony plant?
Yeah, I've heard that. I'm not sure that mechanism, but I don't think they're the pollinators.
But it's another thing we could, once again, there are more species of plants than we have time tonight. But another thing a plant could be doing is feeding the ants, not to help have pollen, but like ants are horrible. Like if you're like, in the bushes and there's ants all over this, they bite you. So if you're an animal, you stay away. So by feeding the ants, you might be preventing a herbivore from coming and eating your leaves. So there's a whole nother thing that could be going on. Yeah, yeah.
I think there's some ants, like I have spireas in my yard, and so the aphids come and the ants protect the spireas.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that's.
So people at home were just talking about ants, and so there are situations where ants can protect plants from aphids.
No, they protect the aphids.
Oh, they protect the aphids from the plants. Okay, I'm sorry.
Protect the aphids is
Oh,
what they're
okay.
doing.
Oh, okay. So they're protecting the aphids.
I just Googled just
Uh-huh.
a bit. Apparently, peonies have an extremely high sugar content in their nectaries,
Uh-huh.
and that's what attracts the ants.
Oh, okay. Do peonies have a preferred pollinator? Does it say in your research?
Nope, they're just saying biological mutualism between ants, which feed on the nectar and in return protect the peony buds from pests like aphids and thrips.
So not a pollination thing as much as a protection thing.
Right.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that.
Cool. You learn something new every day. Love it.
Yeah, and just knowing nature, I'm so humbled by the frequency with which I'm like, I never heard of that. Like you'd think you'd get to a age and you're like, I've heard of most things, or like, and then you're like, nah, wow, that was completely new to me. So there's always something amazing to learn in the natural world.
Still so much to learn. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. And invasive species next week.
See you then.